I'm still struggling to come to terms with what happened in our house last month. I've never been someone who remembers dreams. My wife Sarah always talks about hers over breakfast, while I usually just shrug and say I don't recall anything. That changed about a month ago when the nightmares started. The first time it happened, I woke up drenched in sweat around 3 in the morning. My heart was pounding so hard I could actually hear it. Sarah was still sound asleep next to me, but I couldn't shake this overwhelming feeling of dread. I remembered the dream so vividly. I was standing in our bedroom doorway looking down our hallway when I saw something. It's hard to describe without sounding crazy. It looked human, but wrong in every possible way. Its body was skeletal, like someone who'd been starving for months. The skin was this sickly pale white color, stretched so tight over its frame you could see every bone. But the worst part was its face. Those eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just 2 black holes staring back at me, and the way it moved, Jesus. It crawled on all 4s, but not like a baby or an animal. It moved fast, scuttling along the wall with these long, sharp-pointed fingers that seemed to dig into the drywall. In the dream, I chased after it. I don't know why. In real life, I'd run the other direction. But Dream Me followed it down the hallway, getting closer and closer until I woke up. I didn't tell Sarah about it the next morning. It was just a nightmare, right? But then it happened again the next night. Exact same dream. Same creature, same hallway, same chase. And again, I woke up just as I was about to catch it. After the 3rd night in a row, I finally told Sarah. She looked concerned, but tried to play it off. Maybe you're stressed about work, she suggested. I am stressed about work, but this felt different. This felt personal somehow. The dreams continued every single night. Sometimes the creature would look back at me while crawling, its neck twisting at an impossible angle. Other times, it would be scratching at our spare bedroom door. But it was always in our hallway, always the same entity, and I always woke up before catching it. After about 2 weeks of this, Sarah started to get worried. I wasn't sleeping well, jumping at shadows during the day. I found myself avoiding our hallway at night, taking the long way around through the living room to get to the bathroom. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. Maybe we should sage the house, Sarah suggested one evening. She's more into that spiritual stuff than I am. But at that point, I was willing to try anything. We bought some sage bundles from this New Age shop downtown and walked through every room, waving smoke into corners while Sarah recited some cleansing prayer she found online. That night, I went to bed feeling hopeful. Maybe the sage had worked. Maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I didn't. The dream started the same way. Me in the doorway, the creature in the hallway. But this time, something was different. The thing seemed angry. It moved more erratically, its head twitching and fingers scratching deeper into the wall, leaving visible marks. And when it looked back at me, its mouth opened far wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. In the dream, I chased it like always. But this time, as it reached the end of the hallway, I lunged forward and actually caught it. My hand closed around its ankle, which felt ice-cold and somehow wrong, like grabbing a dead thing. It turned to look at me, and then, according to Sarah, I let out the most horrific scream she's ever heard. She said it didn't even sound human. This deep, guttural noise that jolted her awake. She shook me until I woke up, but here's the weird part. I have absolutely no memory of what happened after I caught the creature. The dream just stops there, like someone cut the film, and I have no recollection of screaming. The next few nights, the dream stopped. I thought maybe whatever was happening had finally ended. Sarah and I even joked about it over dinner. Maybe you scared the nightmare monster away with your banshee scream, she said. Then came the night that changed everything. We were in bed around 11:30, watching some stupid reality show on Netflix. Our dog, Max, was curled up at the foot of the bed like always. Suddenly he raised his head and stared at our closed bedroom door, the one that leads to the hallway from my nightmares. At first, I didn't think much of it. Max sometimes hears the neighbors or animals outside, but then he stood up, the fur on his back rising, and started growling. I've had Max for 6 years, and I've never heard him make a sound like that. This deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from his entire body. Sarah muted the TV. "What's wrong with him?" she whispered. Max stepped forward, still growling, eyes fixed on the door. Then he barked. 3 sharp, aggressive barks that made both of us jump. I got out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat I keep under my side of the bed. Sarah thinks it's paranoid, but in that moment, she didn't say a word as I gripped it tightly. "David, be careful," she whispered as I approached the door. Max was going absolutely ballistic now, alternating between growling and barking. I stood there for what felt like forever, my hand on the doorknob, the bat raised in my other hand. Part of me didn't want to open that door. Part of me knew, just knew, that the thing from my dreams would be right there, crawling along our hallway wall with those black eyes staring at me. Sarah had turned on the bedside lamp, and I could see her terrified face in my peripheral vision. Max was now positioned between her and the door, like he was trying to protect her. "I'm going to open it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah nodded, her phone in her hand, ready to call 911. I counted to 3 in my head, then yanked the door open and raised the bat. What happened next is something I still can't explain. The hallway was filled with this impossibly bright white light, like someone had set off a flashbulb right in my face. It was blinding, but it didn't hurt my eyes. It felt, I don't know how to describe it, clean, pure. Those words sound ridiculous, but that's what it felt like. The light lasted maybe 2 seconds, then vanished, leaving our normal dark hallway. I fumbled for the light switch and flipped it on, bat still raised, expecting to see something. But the hallway was empty, just our normal hallway with its beige walls and family photos. The strangest part? Max immediately stopped growling. He actually wagged his tail and trotted into the hallway like nothing had happened, sniffing around casually. Sarah and I searched the entire house, closets, under beds, behind furniture. Nothing was disturbed. No windows or doors were open. Everything was exactly as we'd left it when we went to bed. We barely slept that night, sitting up with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the house. But nothing else happened, and I haven't had the nightmare since. Here's where it gets even weirder. A few days later, Sarah and I were trying to make sense of what happened. I mentioned that the creature in my dreams seemed familiar somehow, but I couldn't place why. Then it hit me. About 3 years ago, shortly after we moved into this house, I saw something outside our kitchen window one night. I was up late, getting a glass of water, when I glanced out the window above the sink and saw a face. Just for a split second, a pale white face peering in. I'd convinced myself it was just a reflection or my tired mind playing tricks. But now I realized it was the same face from my nightmares, the same sickly white skin, the same black eyes. I hadn't connected the two until that moment. When I told Sarah, she got chills. "Do you think it's been here the whole time?" she asked. The thought makes my skin crawl. We've talked a lot about what the white light could have been. Sarah believes it was some kind of guardian angel or protective spirit. I'm not usually one for supernatural explanations, but I can't come up with anything better. Whatever it was, it felt benevolent, like it was driving away the thing from my nightmares. It's been a month now with no dreams, no growling from Max, no strange feelings in the hallway, but I still find myself avoiding it at night, and sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I think I see movement along the wall. Just a flicker, like something darting out of sight. We've talked about moving, but houses are expensive, and we can't afford to just pick up and leave. So we're staying, at least for now. I keep the baseball bat closer than ever, and we've installed more lights in the hallway. I don't know what was in our house, or if it's truly gone. I don't know what the white light was. All I know is that something was here, something that could somehow enter my dreams, something that terrified our dog. And I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there somewhere, waiting. I still can't remember what happened in that dream when I finally caught it. Maybe that's for the best. Story 8. I've been putting off writing this for months because honestly, I'm still not sure how to process what happened. I guess I need to get it out though. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar or has some kind of explanation that makes sense. Because nothing about this makes sense to me. This happened about 7 months ago when my fiancé James and I were living with our roommate Kevin in Oak Vale. It's this small Midwestern town where nothing ever happens, which makes what we experienced even more unsettling. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special about it. James and I had smoked a little weed earlier in the evening, but that was hours before, like around 6 p.m., and this happened closer to 11. I mention this because it's the only rational explanation we could come up with later, but it doesn't really explain anything. We were just hanging out in our bedroom watching this Korean drama on Netflix. It was about this fake shaman who scams people or something. I can't even remember the name of it now because I'll never watch it again. James was half asleep next to me, and I was getting pretty drowsy too. Our roommate Kevin was in his room next door playing some shooting game. I could hear the faint sounds of gunfire through the wall. I remember my eyes feeling heavy, and I was about to suggest we call it a night when it happened. It didn't build gradually. 1 second everything was normal, and the next it was like we'd been dropped straight into hell. I heard screaming, not like movie screaming or even like someone being hurt, but something so much worse. It sounded like hundreds of people burning alive, wailing in absolute agony. The screams had this depth to them that I can't describe properly. It was like they were coming from somewhere impossibly deep beneath us. At the same time, I felt the bed shaking violently under me. Not like an earthquake exactly, more like the ground itself was convulsing. I couldn't see anything, just pitch blackness, but I could feel everything. The heat was overwhelming, pressing against my skin, making it hard to breathe. And there was this smell, like burning flesh and sulfur. I started screaming too. I couldn't help it. I was terrified in a way I've never experienced before or since. It was pure, primal fear. I felt frozen, like my body was locked in place while my mind experienced this horror. The weirdest part, James was experiencing the exact same thing. I didn't know it at the time, but he was seeing and feeling exactly what I was. He started screaming at the same moment I did, but unlike me, he managed to move. He jumped up from the bed and started running toward our bedroom door in a blind panic. I just sat there, paralyzed, still screaming. I don't know how long it lasted, probably only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then suddenly it stopped. The screaming cut off, the shaking stopped, and I could see our bedroom again. The Netflix show was still on our laptop, stuttering, playing for a second, then freezing, then playing again. James was standing by the door, breathing hard and looking terrified. I was still sitting on the bed, my throat raw from screaming. We just stared at each other, both of us trying to process what had just happened. Then we heard Kevin pounding on our door. "What the fuck is going on? Are you guys okay? Open the door." He sounded panicked. James opened the door, and Kevin burst in holding his gun. He looked around the room frantically like he was expecting to find an intruder. When he saw it was just us, looking shaken but physically fine, he lowered the gun. "What the hell happened?" "I heard screaming that sounded like bloody murder," he said. James and I looked at each other, neither of us sure how to explain. How do you tell someone you just experienced hell? "I don't know," I finally managed to say. My voice was shaking. "We were watching this show and then... I don't know what happened." Kevin stayed with us for a while as we tried to calm down. We noticed the laptop keyboard was stuck, making the show stutter. At first we thought maybe that had something to do with it, Like maybe there was a scene with screaming that got caught in a loop. But when we checked the episode, there was nothing like that, just normal drama stuff. After Kevin went back to his room, James and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he turned to me and asked, "Did you hear the screaming?" I nodded. "And feel the shaking, like the ground was moving?" I nodded again. "And it was dark but hot, like burning hot?" Each question made my stomach sink further. He was describing exactly what I had experienced. Exactly. James is more religious than I am. He was raised Catholic, and though he's not super practicing now, he still believes. That night, he was convinced that something supernatural had happened, that maybe watching that show about shamans had opened some kind of doorway. It sounds ridiculous typing it out, but sitting there in the dark, still feeling the echo of those screams in my ears, it didn't seem so far-fetched. I tried to be more rational. I thought about the weed we'd smoked earlier, wondering if maybe it had been laced with something. But we'd smoked hours before, and both felt completely normal until that moment. And how could we both hallucinate the exact same thing at the exact same time? We didn't sleep at all that night. We kept all the lights on and just sat there, talking in low voices, jumping at every little sound. I kept thinking I could still hear those screams, just at the edge of my hearing. The next day, we were zombies. I called in sick to work, and James did too. We tried to research shared hallucinations or night terrors, but nothing we found matched what we'd experienced. Most shared experiences happen when one person suggests something to another, or when there's a carbon monoxide leak or something physical causing delusions. But this was so specific, so intense, and so synchronized. Kevin confirmed that our screams had started at exactly the same moment. He said he'd never heard anything like it, said it sounded like we were being murdered. He thought someone had broken in through our window or something. That's why he grabbed his gun. It's been 7 months now, and I still don't have an explanation. James and I have been to therapy, separately and together. We've had our apartment checked for gas leaks, mold, carbon monoxide, everything. We've even had our brain scanned to rule out seizures or other neurological issues. Nothing. The experience changed us. I can't hear screaming now, even in movies, without having a panic attack. James refuses to watch anything supernatural or related to shamanism. We moved out of that apartment 2 months after it happened, but the memory came with us. What freaks me out the most is how synchronized it was. We experienced the exact same hallucination, with the same sensory details, at the exact same moment. How is that even possible? Sometimes I wonder if we actually glimpsed something real. Not hell in the religious sense necessarily, but some kind of parallel dimension or reality that we weren't supposed to see. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I'd rather have a rational explanation, but I've run out of those. We've talked to a few paranormal researchers, but most of them seem more interested in turning our experience into content for their YouTube channels than actually helping us understand what happened. One suggested that the K-drama about the shaman might have been filmed in a location with a dark history, and somehow that energy transferred through the screen. Another thought that James and I might be more sensitive than most people, and picked up on something that was always there but usually imperceptible. None of these explanations feel right. They feel like reaching, like people trying to make sense of something that defies explanation. I still dream about it sometimes. In the dreams, I can see more than I could that night. I see flames and twisted figures writhing in agony. I see a vast cavern stretching down forever. I wake up sweating and gasping for air, convinced I can smell sulfur. James has the same dreams. We don't watch Korean dramas anymore. We don't watch Netflix in bed. We sleep with a light on. These are the small adjustments we've made to try to feel normal again. But the question still hangs between us. What really happened that night? I've read stories of shared psychotic disorders, of mass hysteria, of temporary psychosis triggered by stress or lack of sleep. None of them fit. We weren't stressed beyond normal everyday stuff. We weren't sleep-deprived. We weren't suggestible to each other's thoughts. It happened simultaneously, without warning. Sometimes I find myself wondering if it will happen again, if whatever door opened that night is still open somewhere, waiting for us to drift close enough to fall through. That thought keeps me up more nights than I'd like to admit. So that's my story. I still don't have an explanation. James and I are still together, still planning our wedding, still trying to move on. But part of me is always listening for those screams, always worried that the ground beneath me might start to shake again, always wondering what really lies beneath the surface of the reality we think we know. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? I'm not even sure what I'm looking for anymore. Validation that I'm not crazy, I guess. Or maybe just the comfort of knowing we're not alone in whatever this was. Story 9. I've never really told this story in full before. It's hard to explain to people who haven't grown up like I did. They either think you're making it up, or they get that look in their eyes like they're worried about your mental health. But this was my reality growing up, and it still is whenever I visit home. I grew up in a house that's been in my family since 1903. My great-great-grandfather built it himself. It's not a mansion or anything fancy, just a 2-story farmhouse with too many nooks and creaky floorboards that have witnessed 5 generations of my family living, dying, and apparently sticking around. The first incident I know of happened when I was just a baby. My dad would put me down for naps in my crib, leave the room for literally 2 minutes to grab something, and come back to find me on the floor. Not crying, not hurt, just lying there like someone had carefully placed me down. This happened several times. They checked the crib, thinking maybe the side was faulty, but it was solid. Eventually, my dad stayed in the doorway one time watching and swears he saw the crib physically move away from the wall before I somehow ended up on the floor. They started using a playpen after that. As I got older, the weird stuff just became normal to us. My brother Jake and I shared a room until I was about 11. We'd both regularly wake up to see silhouettes standing at the foot of our beds or by the closet. Not scary shadow monsters or anything, just people-shaped figures watching us. One was always wearing this old-fashioned hat, kind of like a fedora but wider brimmed. Years later, we found a photo of my great-grandfather wearing that exact same hat. Jake had it worse than me in some ways. He'd constantly complain about feeling someone sit on his bed at night and rub his back. He said it felt like a woman's hand, small and gentle. I never experienced that myself, but our sisters in the room across the hall said they always felt like they were being watched while they slept. My youngest sister, Ellie, would have these long conversations with someone she called Grammy Jean, who died 20 years before Ellie was born. I was about 9 when things started getting more intense. One afternoon, Jake and I were making silly faces in the hallway mirror, you know, typical kid stuff, when we both froze. In the reflection, we could see the staircase behind us, and sitting on one of the steps was a single boot. Just one brown leather work boot sitting there like someone had left it. We both turned around at the same time, but there was nothing on the stairs. When we looked back at the mirror, the boot was gone. That same year, I started hearing voices, not in my head. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'd hear actual conversations coming from empty rooms, not clear enough to make out words, more like the murmur of people talking, just quiet enough that you can't quite hear what they're saying. I'd go investigate, thinking my parents had company, only to find empty rooms. The objects moving, though, that was the hardest to rationalize away. A pencil would suddenly shoot across my desk while I was doing homework. Once, a small cardboard box flew off the shelf in the living room and hit my dad in the back. He thought one of us kids had thrown it until he saw our faces and realized we were all as shocked as he was. Books were the worst. We had these built-in bookshelves in the living room, filled with old family photo albums and books that had been passed down. At least once a month, we'd hear a thud and find a book on the floor several feet from the shelf, not like it had fallen, like it had been thrown. One time, My mum's favorite cookbook landed open to a specific recipe that she'd been trying to remember earlier that day. The headphone incident is one I still can't explain. I was 14 and had saved up for a nice pair of over-ear headphones. I definitely left them on my bedroom floor one night. Yeah, I was a messy teenager. The next morning, they were sitting on my dresser, the cord neatly coiled in a perfect circle. My room was on the second floor, and I know nobody came in during the night. My door has this specific creak that would wake me up instantly, but the apparitions, those are what really stick with me. When I was 12, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. My bedroom door was always left slightly ajar to let some hallway light in. As I was lying there trying to convince myself to brave the cold floor, I saw a woman walk past my door through the crack. She was wearing what looked like an old nightgown, long and flowing. I figured it was my mom checking on us kids, but then the woman slowly turned her head toward my door and looked directly at me through the crack. Her face was similar to my mom's, but definitely not her. Older somehow, with this intense stare that didn't feel threatening, just curious. Then she continued down the hall and disappeared. The next morning, I described what I'd seen to my dad, and his face went completely white. He said he'd seen the same woman multiple times over the years, and from photos, we think it was my great-grandmother Emma. My sister Ellie had the scariest experience when she was about 13. She was up late reading in her bedroom, which faces the front of the house. She happened to look up at her window and saw a man's face staring in at her. We're on the first floor, but still, this would mean someone was standing on the stone porch. She screamed, and the figure darted away. My dad ran outside within seconds, but found nobody. The weird part, Ellie said she never heard footsteps on the porch, which is impossible. Those stones make noise no matter how carefully you walk on them, and there was frost that night that would have shown footprints. There were none. The typical haunted house stuff happened too. Doors that were firmly shut would slowly swing open. We'd hear knocking sounds from inside walls. The TV in the living room would turn on by itself, always to static or to channels we didn't have. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms, especially the formal dining room we rarely used. I think what made it all more intense was the connection to our family history that was everywhere. There's a small family cemetery about 200 yards behind the house where generations of my ancestors are buried. We have furniture they built, quilts they stitched, and photos of them on the walls. Their possessions are still in use. I did my homework at my great-grandfather's desk, using my grandmother's fountain pen. As a teenager, I went through a phase where I tried to communicate with them. I'd sit in the attic surrounded by old trunks and ask questions, hoping for some kind of response. Sometimes I'd get one, a knock or a sudden cold spot. Once, a music box that hadn't worked in decades suddenly started playing for about 10 seconds before stopping. When I was 17, I had friends over while my parents were out for the evening. We were hanging out in the living room when everyone suddenly got really quiet. One of my friends, Matt, was staring wide-eyed at the hallway entrance. "Dude, who's that old lady?" he asked. None of us saw anyone, but Matt was genuinely freaked out. He described a woman in her 70s wearing a floral dress with her hair in a bun. It matched the description of my grandmother perfectly, down to her favorite dress pattern. Matt had never seen photos of her or heard descriptions. She died before I was born. The weird thing is, I never felt threatened by any of this. Startled, sure. Confused, definitely. But there was always this sense that whoever or whatever was sharing our house with us wasn't malicious. They seemed more interested, like they were checking in on us, making sure we were okay, or maybe just curious about how their descendants were living in the home they'd built. I moved out for college at 18, and now live about 2 hours away, but I still visit regularly, and the activity hasn't stopped. Last Christmas, I was staying in my old room when I woke up to find all the dresser drawers open about 2 inches, perfectly aligned. I know they were closed when I went to bed. My parents still live there and have just accepted it as part of life. My dad jokes that at least we always know when something is lost. Just wait a day or two, and it'll turn up in some obvious place we've already checked 3 times. The house is going to be mine someday. It's been passed down through the oldest child in each generation, and that's me. Sometimes I wonder if I'll be one of them eventually, one of the watchful ancestors keeping an eye on future generations. The thought doesn't scare me anymore. I've had paranormal investigators offer to come check out the house, but we've always declined. These aren't some random spirits, they're family. And in a strange way, knowing they're still around is comforting. The house has never felt empty, even when I'm there alone. Last month, I was helping my dad clear out some old boxes in the basement when we found a journal belonging to my great-grandfather. In it, he mentioned the others who walk the halls at night, describing experiences almost identical to ours. It seems the haunting has been going on since the house was built, with each generation of inhabitants becoming the watchers for the next. So that's my story. I've never had a normal night's sleep in that house, never been alone, even when I was the only living person there. I still see them sometimes, reflections in windows, figures at the edges of my vision, the man in the hat standing at the foot of my bed. But they're just checking in, making sure their home and their family are still here, still continuing what they started over 100 years ago.